Thank you, everyone. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'll share with you the journey of a large federal agency. I think Kirk already said Center Medicaid and Medicare Services, and how they got started with AI. And I'll go over their business case, because I think, as we already mentioned a number of times, that's really critical, and I think they had a really good business case. And second, I'll talk to you a little bit about how they got started, what was their approach, and finally their benefits. And they're currently in production, and they got some really amazing benefits, so I'll share all that with you. But for those of you who may be like me and may only remember just a few things, I'd like to leave you with three things today, three key points. One is, I think it's been mentioned a few times by Don, by Kirk, by others, is, a question came up, is that convergence of those technologies. And what we found out in a lot of our projects is that when you really, to maximize your business value, when you use really all your tool sets that you have, so in this case, the RPA, robotics process automation, AI, that's when you can get the most benefit. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Second is to really get to your success, it's going to be important to involve the human. And it's going to be from a lot of different facets. It's going to be from the process side of it, from putting the human in the loop and all that. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but make sure as you get started with AI, you think about the human and how they're going to be impacted by this and how they're going to be part of the solution. And third, and again, I think our Captain Michael mentioned this many times, is that the most important thing that you can do is get started. And you'll see their use case wasn't that trivial. And with AI, most often, it's not going to be black and white. It's not going to be a simple use case. It's going to actually resolve some pretty complex issues that you never thought that machines could do. Well, machines can do that right now. And getting started is really the first thing. So with that said, let's get started. So I'll talk to you a little bit about just CMS, again, Center Medicare and Medicaid Services. They may not be a commercial entity, but they're actually the largest insurer of U.S. and probably the world, right? So a pretty big company in terms of, or organization in terms of what they do. And as you can imagine, so every year, the center that we work with, they're responsible for validating some of the payments that come in. Some of the payments that go out of them. And basically, what they do, the process, how they get started, is that they tell these plans and providers, hey, send me some, I'm going to select a few of you, send me some your evidence of the payment. So in this case, the evidence are these medical records. And they get about 100,000 or so. Actually, last year they got a little bit over 40,000. This year they got 100,000 medical records. So there's obviously a significant increase, and I expect that to go up every year. And for those of you that may not be familiar with medical records, I have kind of some sample pictures in a couple of slides, but these can range anywhere between 10 pages or so to anywhere, I think one of the bigger ones that I've seen was over 30,000 pages. And there's no particular format, it's all unstructured, and some pretty complex documents that they're looking at. And they need to, and just to go a little bit briefly, what that validation consists of is that they basically go through those documents and make sure that, is it the right person, is it the right name? So let's say, simple case, you're looking at a 100-page document. You need to check, first of all, is it rotated correctly? Because these are scanned in, and maybe a page 10 to 25, maybe 90 degrees. Then, page 56 to 63, maybe by accident, it might be someone else's medical record. Is it the right provider type? Is it, does it have the signature? Does it have the right forms in there? So all these different validations up to, does it have the right symptoms that validate the diagnostics so that the payment can be made? So all these different things that they need to do, and they have basically contractors that do this for every record. Again, 100,000 of these, they have to go check it page by page and do this. So what was the business case here? What was the business challenge that they were trying to solve? So they obviously, if you're looking at 100,000 medical records and kind of the process that I mentioned to you, it's going to take time, right? It's a very time-intensive effort. Now, some of these may take, to go through the whole process, days to do this. So they looking at innovation to potentially improve some of those, get some of those efficiencies out of it. They obviously have limited funds and resources. Again, 100,000 I mentioned is actually a small percentage of what they could do. But there's so many people, and they have to do it in a certain amount of time. So and there's so much funding that they have to do this. And it's going to take, you got to train. I mean, this is not something you could just give to someone to do. Just hire someone on the street. You got to actually be a medical coder, certified coder, and so it takes training and experience to do these. Additionally, we talked about the volume, and lastly, again, we're looking at this 100 pages. You could make mistakes, and oftentimes I'll talk about the solution that we implemented. The machine actually discovered cases where, it said something is invalid, but then we checked as we were testing, and the humans at the time, they said it's valid. They just missed something. And it's, everyone can do it, and it's nothing against them. If you're looking at a 1,000-page document, you may miss a page, right? So having these very highly manual, intensive effort, there's room for mistake. Again, I talked a little bit about the business case. So you're talking about 100,000 documents, a high volume, a lot of effort, so a great business case. And lastly, their users, in this case, are their stakeholders, were the providers. And they didn't want to know 3 months in after they submitted that, for instance, they actually, by mistake, they uploaded a Chinese menu, and that actually happened once. So that's important to get feedback quickly. And those are some of the things, as they were talking to their users, they had that conversation, they were looking to improve some of these different values. So, as I mentioned, here are some sample records. As you can see, these are not your best documents. These are scanned in. Again, if you haven't seen Medicare, and by the way, these are fake records, or it's not real medical records. Charlie Brown maybe is a patient, but at least this one is fake. But some of them are going to be somewhat nicely digital. In the middle one, not maybe all handwritten, or maybe crumbled. So you're not really dealing with great documents, and that's where machine learning and other technologies can help kind of improve some of the accuracy and just the validity of these documents. So these are the documents that we're working with, and I'll mention later, but again, we're not planning, and we made set expectations right from the start, is that it may not get that middle one, which is all handwritten. Machines may not be that good, and frankly, doctors' handwriting is not that great. I may not be able to read this. So, there are going to be cases that just machine is not going to, and that's where, as I mentioned, having humans in the loop is going to be important. So let's go a little bit about the approach. But before I talk about the approach, let me, again, break down kind of what they would do if they were doing this manually. So basically, they're logging into their system. They will log in, navigate to the right screen. Then they click a button, which gives them the next record to review. So these are, again, medical coders doing this. And when they get to the next record, they open up the document. So again, imagine you have a 100-page document. They go through page by page, confirm, hey, is it the right name? Does the name match with what the payment was made against the claim? They go to the next page, providers type, the service, all these things match or not. If everything is valid, then they would go and submit it to go to the next step, the next reviewer to check additional validations. If it's not, then they will need to escalate it to someone else. So we looked at this process and we said, okay, let's break it down. So you need to navigate. That's something that robotics process automation can do. That workflow management, that navigation part of it, do some simple rules here and there. Robotic process automation is great at that. Next thing, now you upload the record or download the record, and now you need to make that digital. You have an image in that document right now. It's not digital. As humans, we could see it. The machine can't see it. So now we need optical character recognition as well as ICR to digitize that all that information so that machines can read it. So that's the next thing that happened. Again, RPA would actually, robotics process automation would again kind of orchestrate all of those steps. Next, now everything is digital, great. Just like a human, now I can see. I got the document in front of me, I can see it. But now I need to actually make those more cognitive comparisons in terms of, hey, it's a simple example. If I have a date of birth, it's easy for us humans to kind of figure out, hey, this is a date of birth versus this is a date of service versus this is a date that the current date or something else versus even a zip code, right? A zip code, if you actually think, is that, it has kind of the same similar format to a particular date. Well, machine, it can confuse itself. So that's where natural language processing and machine learning come in to, if you remember back in that sample record, for instance, the date of birth on this one, on the middle one is at the top, on the left one was actually in the footer, in some of the other ones like in the middle, maybe somewhere in the free text, somebody saying, and this is needed for every type of these documents, understanding the context. So not just, there may be some labels, but in addition to that, you may need to understand the context of where that date or where that name or where that provider type is, all of the information that you're looking for, so that you could say, hey, if I need to compare date of birth against date of birth, this is the right field and this is what I'm going to compare it to. So that's where natural language processing and machine learning come in, as well as we're using some deep neural networks to do like form validation, signature validation. Some of these things are a little bit more complicated to do, so where you need to understand a little bit, you need to train the machines a little bit more. And luckily for us, we had thousands of records from historical data that we could use to test and train the data. So again, to my number one point, we use a number of these different tools from the overall tool set to get this done. RPA could only do so much, AI could only do so much, but to get to that end-to-end automation, to get to maximize our business value, using all of these tools provided that to us. Second, I talked about the human in the loop, and let me elaborate a little bit more on that. Is that one, involving the users up front, I think that was really important for us. We talked to the medical coders right from the beginning, and one is, for instance, there may be rules there that said, does the name match? If the name matches, click here. If the name doesn't match, click there. But for a machine, that's a completely different, you can't just put that, programming that in there. Because it's actually, when we talk to them, it's not that simple. There may be Michael, Mike, so there may be different variations of that name. There may be, if there was a spelling that was fine. It could be corrected somewhere. So some of the documentation that you may have may not be valid. So one, involving the human. Two, more importantly, is that, as I mentioned, when you get started with AI, don't expect that you're going to do AI or machines are going to do everything. It may do, and again, it could do potentially a lot of it, maybe even everything, but then the complexity of your project goes up a lot. So it's going to be important to say, hey, what are machines good for? Machines are good to get that document that's more digital. Maybe it's more of a more standard use case. So I'm going to automate those. At least that's what I'm going to start with. So I'm going to spend my effort and my money and my budget on, that's going to be my first iteration. Let me do those simpler validations, like, again, like for the first phase, we did the rotations. Obviously, that's easy or easier. Do the name comparisons for all the ones that had mostly digital records. Do the date of birth, the provider type, and a lot of these different checks. And what we did was that we actually found out is there was still 80% of their medical records actually were more of the kind of like happy flows, where a machine could do them. And that 20% went to a human to do, but again, involving the human, telling them basically as part of my process, it's not that the machine is going to do everything. The machine is going to do as much as it can. It's going to send the rest to, assign it to a human to do it. And that way, the complexity of our project diminished, the risk of our project diminished, and so there's a lot of value in figuring out, hey, let's not try to solve everything. Let's see where machine is good at and where humans are good at. And so humans can spend more time doing those more complex scenarios, like those handwriting or those that have a lot of different date of service and things like that. So let's go over a little bit about the benefits that they got. So as I mentioned, this is live in production. We just finished this last year, and they're actually, by the way, doing 2014. So they have a backlog of a few years as well. And so there were about 90,000 records that we did, about 3 million pages. And there's 90,000 records, by the way. If you remember at the top, I said 100,000 records. Another fascinating fact is that, so they said, hey, I'm going to actually ask the providers if they want this or not. So there was a question at the top when they were submitting their form, their medical records, do you want this to be automated or not? And that wasn't defaulted. So they actually had to take an additional step to ask for automation. And around 90% actually wanted that automation. So that's what your users are expecting from you. They want automation, they want things to be faster. They don't want the regular, it's going to take 3 months for you to get back to me. So that was interesting for us to find out. So the process right now, and currently it takes a machine about a minute to do, and we're actually making some improvements, and we think we're going to get that a lot lower. But versus for that one, and this is just one of the steps that we kind of took, or one of the, I think about 7 or 8 different validations that it's doing right now. The human is on average about 30 minutes to do this. And remember, if you have a machine doing this, they can do this 24/7. Human, it takes them, you work 8 hours, you're going to take some breaks. So if you do the math, if I had a machine doing this, 90,000 records, 24/7, it's going to take one machine, just a little bit over 60 days to do this. Again, this is not, we don't get all the records, but just to give you a little comparison. If you had one person doing this, I believe it takes a little bit over 22 years. So that's 60 days to 22 years. That's a huge gain that you get. So there were over 40,000 hours saved. That's a lot of people that they, instead of adding in, which they really couldn't really hire, or they didn't have the budget, as well as it just wasn't sustainable, especially if they want to keep scaling and do more records. So they're saving over 40,000. They're getting over 95% accuracy with no false positive. And the reason why I mentioned that no false positive is another point is that it's going to be important for you to look at, as you go with AI, what are some of the metrics that are important in your business case? For us is that we were not so worried about getting, if a record is, we think, has low accuracy and it's not, there's a low probability that the machine got it right, we'd rather send that to a human to validate and make sure, because we don't want to say something is valid and send it to the next step, because that's going to be additional cost, and they may also miss that improper payment that should have been there. So that was kind of the decision as we worked with our business, with our sponsors. That was what's important to them. They'd rather get someone else to just review it and make sure of that. They just did not want any records to go by that was invalid. So that was the most important metric for us, and that was important for us to define that so that we could then make our models work for that. Again, overall, making it a lot faster. That's about it. Any questions?
Is there any risk of the AI deleting data without you wanting it to? Is there any risk of that?
That's a good question. So the question was, is there any risk of AI deleting data? So that's a very common, and again, I think a lot of the initial discussions that we had, these aren't new, so there's always, hey, are these bots going to go rogue, or are these bots going to do things they're not supposed to do? One thing, especially using robotics process automation, we're working as a user, so we have the same rights. We got the same rights as a regular user. A user wasn't allowed to delete anything, and so was this login that was the access that was given to that bot. Additionally, from a robotics process automation, it does every step as it is told. There's a really good audit trail of it. From an AI perspective, so we're actually tracking everything that why it made that decision in terms of what it is that they really compare it to. So that's you can go back to that and why it did that. And actually, every time he runs it, it's going to get a consistent answer. It's going to get the same answer every time. So it's not just this, and again, with humans, if I send it to maybe one person to another person, they may decide something differently. But the AI solution, at least for this one, is going to consistently say the same thing. And that's actually really great because now, even if I want to, later on in the future, I want to go, hey, why did this? I could run it again with the same code version. It would give me the exact same answer. And now I got a consistent determination every time.
So how much have you reduced improper payments using this technology?
So I don't have those, because our goal wasn't necessarily to increase the improper payments. Well, obviously, that's a outcome of it, was really to improve the process itself, right? So that, this is a process that we're going to do regardless. And it was either you're going to do it manually, all manual, or you're going to use some automation to do this. I think our really value that they got from using this wasn't so much from the improper payments, because there's a lot of other things that go through it. That's not just this, but it's 40,000 hours saved. That's a lot of dollars that they could have spent on contractors or other things, or they maybe would just say, hey, I can't do this 100,000. I got to go back to doing 40,000 records, right? So they could do more. So you could potentially say that they might have doubled their, but again, that was just not something that we really measured for our case. I think there was another question, or?
Yeah, so if you can help clarify, you said that the AI would do something the same every time. If there's a human that identifies some type of error that only they could pick up based on, let's say, a written medical record, and that person goes in and says, hey, well, I'm going to go over and override and make this decision here, would the benefit then of AI then to learn from that human intervention and then standardize that across future iterations and therefore give a different output because that human, they learn from the human that intervened? Is that capable in your system?
Yes and no. So we do take some of those learnings for next year. So we did make some of those changes. As we found out they signed it, and the human did it, and we talked to them and why they made that decision, and then we trained our models with that. It wasn't necessarily automatic, and again, and most often, as you will see, is that especially with AI, and when you're doing something regulatory, something like this, it's going to be really important to understand why it's making a decision. You don't want to necessarily have an automated feedback loop. But also, in addition to that, so yes, there was some, but again, there are some cases that machines, we could do it, but it's going to take a lot more effort and complexity to do this. And just humans we're better at it. It's a lot easier for us to do this and train a machine to do it. It's just more cognitive power that's needed that machines are not potentially able to do, or they're not as good at it. Reading and handwriting is actually a pretty complex thing. So these, we still rather, again, the machine will do it and say, hey, I'm not feeling confident of my results, so I have a low probability of my results. I'm going to reassign this to a human to look at. Did that answer your question?
All right. Well, I think that's a really interesting use case of, again, how we're trying to use the cognitive abilities of a human and have a machine-based rote process automated to essentially, as you can see, achieve some pretty staggering ROI numbers. And so, we're really excited about this particular use case because, again, this can relate to a number of different agencies and a number of different use cases that are very similar. So with that, I'd like to thank Payam. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.